My ex-husband demanded a paternity test to stop paying child support, but the results uncovered a truth he wasn't ready for. My ex-husband Blake is demanding a paternity test because he wants to stop paying child support. Now he's threatening to sue me because he can't believe the results. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Blake and I have 3 children together, twin boys, Cameron and Connor, and our youngest daughter, Sophia. The divorce was brutal. Blake left me when I was 7 months pregnant with the twins, walking out the door with his secretary-turned-girlfriend, Brittany, leaving me to figure out how to survive as a single mother. For 5 years after our split, Blake never once questioned whether our children were his. He complained about the child support payments, sure, but he never doubted paternity. That all changed 6 months ago when Brittany started planting seeds of doubt in his mind. You see, Sophia looks different from her siblings. While Cameron and Connor inherited Blake's sandy blonde hair and blue eyes, Sophia has thick, curly dark hair and striking green eyes like mine. Her skin has a beautiful olive tone that neither Blake nor I possess. Blake, being the shallow man he is, started listening to Brittany's whispered suggestions that Sophia doesn't look like family. The truth is, Sophia looks exactly like my grandmother Rosario, who was half Cuban and could pass for white back in the 1950s. But Blake never paid attention to my family history. He was too busy building his new life in Riverside, California, with his home-wrecking wife. The first hint of trouble came from my former sister-in-law, Isabella. Blake's brother Antonio married Isabella 5 years ago, and she's become like the sister I never had. During our weekly coffee at Starbucks in downtown Riverside, Isabella leaned across the table with worry etched on her face. "Scarlett, I have to tell you something," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "Blake's been talking to Antonio about getting a paternity test for Sophia. He wants to stop paying child support for her." My heart sank into my stomach. Not because I had any doubt about Sophia's paternity, I knew she was Blake's daughter, but because I realized how far Blake would go to avoid his responsibilities. Isabella continued, explaining that Blake and Brittany were having serious financial problems. Blake had been working overtime at the construction company just to make ends meet, which explained why he'd been skipping his weekend visits with the kids. That evening, as I tucked my 3 beautiful children into bed in our modest apartment in Corona, I made a decision. If Blake wanted a paternity test, he'd have to take me to court for it. I wasn't going to make it easy for him to abandon his daughter based on Brittany's racist assumptions. The confrontation came 2 days later via text message, because Blake was too much of a coward to call me directly. "We need to talk about Sophia. I want a paternity test. I'm not paying for a kid that isn't mine." I stared at Blake's text message for a full minute before responding. My hands were shaking with rage, but I forced myself to stay calm and calculated. "If you want a paternity test, take me to court. I'm not consenting to anything." His response came within seconds. "She doesn't look like her siblings, Scarlett. It's obvious she's not mine. I can't afford court, and you're holding my money hostage." I almost laughed at the irony. The man who abandoned me while pregnant was now claiming I was holding his money hostage. But I knew Blake's game. He wanted me to pay for the test, and then when the results proved Sophia was his, he'd demand another test, claiming I'd tampered with the first one. He'd pulled the same stunt during our divorce when we had to get the house appraised in Riverside. He didn't like the first appraisal, so we had to get a second one at his insistence. Over the next few weeks, Blake's behavior escalated. He started posting vague comments on Facebook about being forced to raise another man's child, and how I had trapped him by putting his name on Sophia's birth certificate. The posts were carefully worded to avoid mentioning names, but anyone who knew our situation could connect the dots. What Blake didn't realize was that Isabella was screenshotting everything and sending it to me. We developed quite the documentation system over the years. I'd learned the hard way to keep records of everything. The breaking point came when Brittany started her campaign. During one of Blake's rare visits with the kids at Chuck E. Cheese in Corona, Brittany made a comment that 8-year-old Cameron repeated to me. "Mama Brittany said Sophia doesn't look like us because she has a different daddy." I saw red. Brittany had crossed a line by involving the children in her twisted narrative. That night, I called Isabella, and we strategized. If Blake wanted to play dirty, I was ready to fight back. "He's been telling everyone who'll listen that you cheated," Isabella warned me. "Brittany's been showing people photos of Sophia and asking if they think she looks like Blake. It's getting really ugly, Scarlett." I made another decision that night. I would document everything Blake said and did, but I wouldn't engage with his public drama. Let him hang himself with his own rope. The final straw came when Blake sent me a 37-text message rant, demanding I pay for the paternity test and threatening to stop seeing all 3 children if I didn't comply. He claimed he was protecting himself from financial abuse, and that I was manipulating the system. I screenshot every message and forwarded them to my lawyer. If Blake wanted a war, he'd chosen the wrong woman to fight. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get more complicated, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was from Roberto, Blake's father, calling from his home in San Bernardino. Roberto and I had always maintained a good relationship after the divorce. He adored his grandchildren and had never let Blake's poor choices affect his relationship with them. Unlike his son, Roberto was a man of integrity who'd built a successful landscaping business through hard work and treating people fairly. "Scarlett, Mija, I need to talk to you," Roberto said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Blake won't stop complaining to me about this paternity test situation. Him and that wife of his are driving me crazy with their accusations." I listened as Roberto explained that Blake had been calling him almost daily, ranting about how I was stealing his money and refusing to prove Sophia was his daughter. Roberto was fed up with the constant drama and wanted to end it once and for all. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Roberto continued. "I know you, and I know you wouldn't do what Blake is suggesting. But I'm tired of listening to him whine. If I pay for the paternity test, will you agree to it?" I was quiet for a long moment, considering his offer. Roberto was different from his son. He was fair and reasonable. If he was involved, I knew the process would be handled properly. "I'll agree, but with conditions," I finally said. "Blake chooses the testing company, and I don't want to know which one until after it's done. That way, no one can claim I influenced the results." Roberto agreed immediately. "That's fair. And Scarlett? I'm going to have all 3 children tested, not just Sophia. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." Within a week, Roberto had arranged everything. Blake chose a company called Accurate DNA Testing in Los Angeles, and Roberto's lawyer recommended a second company, Paternity Plus in San Diego, as a backup. Roberto explained his strategy to me over dinner at Olive Garden in Riverside. "If Blake tries to argue with the results, I'll have 2 independent tests to shut him up," Roberto said, cutting into his chicken parmesan. "I'm done with his nonsense affecting this family." The testing process was surprisingly simple. Roberto picked up all 3 children on a Saturday morning and drove them to the clinic in Los Angeles. They were back home by noon, chattering excitedly about their special trip with Grandpa Roberto. Now came the hardest part, waiting for results that I already knew would prove Blake was the father of all 3 children. But I also knew that when those results came back, Blake wouldn't accept them quietly. He'd find some way to make this my fault, just like he always did. 2 weeks later, Roberto called with the results. His voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath. "All 3 children are Blake's, just like we knew they would be. Both tests confirm it, 99.9% probability for all 3 kids." The war was about to begin. The results arrived on a Tuesday morning in October. Roberto called me at 8 a.m., just as I was getting the kids ready for school at Lincoln Elementary in Corona. Both tests came back the same: Scarlett. "Cameron, Connor, and Sophia are all Blake's children. 99.9% probability across the board." I felt a mixture of vindication and dread. Vindication because I'd been right all along, and dread because I knew Blake wouldn't accept these results gracefully. True to form, Blake's response was exactly what I expected. Within hours of Roberto sharing the results, Blake was calling his father, demanding to see the actual paperwork. When Roberto showed him the documentation from both Accurate DNA Testing and Paternity Plus, Blake's reaction was explosive. "These tests are wrong," he shouted, according to Isabella, who witnessed the confrontation at Roberto's house in San Bernardino. "There's no way Sophia is mine. Look at her." Roberto, a man who'd spent 70 years on this earth and had little patience for foolishness, shut Blake down immediately. "The tests don't lie, Mijo. Both companies confirmed the same thing. All 3 of your children are yours. Now stop acting like a fool and be their father." But Blake wasn't finished. Instead of accepting the scientific evidence, he doubled down on his delusions. That evening, He posted a long rant on Facebook that Isabella screenshot and sent to me. Just because some lab says something doesn't make it true. I know what I see with my own eyes. My lawyer is going to look into how these tests could be wrong. Some people will do anything to keep taking your money. I actually laughed out loud reading it. Blake didn't have a lawyer, he could barely afford his rent, let alone legal representation. But his public tantrum was far from over. Over the next few days, Blake's Facebook became a daily soap opera of denial and blame. He posted photos of Connor and Cameron, pointing out their resemblance to him, then posted a photo of Sophia, asking his friends if they saw any similarity. The comments section became a battlefield between people defending me and others feeding into Blake's conspiracy theories. The most ridiculous post came 3 days after the results. Planning to take legal action for fraud. When you're forced to sign a birth certificate under false pretenses, that's a crime. Some people think they can manipulate the system forever. Isabella and I had a good laugh over that one during our coffee date at Panera Bread. Blake hadn't been forced to sign anything, he wasn't even at the hospital when Sophia was born. As my legal husband at the time, his name went on the birth certificate automatically. He's really lost it this time, Isabella said, shaking her head. Antonio is embarrassed. The whole family is talking about how Blake is making a fool of himself. But the best part was yet to come. During one of his Facebook rants, Blake mentioned that he was upset I was alienating him from the children by dating someone new. The someone new was Travis, Blake's former best friend who'd been cut out of Blake's life when Brittany decided she didn't like him. Travis and I had been quietly dating for almost a year, and the children had only met him the previous weekend. Unlike Blake, I believed in taking things slow and making sure any man in my life was worthy of meeting my children. The irony wasn't lost on me. Blake, who'd left me for another woman while I was pregnant, was now upset that I was moving on with my life. As Blake's public meltdown continued, more pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Isabella started sharing details about what was really happening behind the scenes, and the picture that emerged was both pathetic and infuriating. It turns out Brittany had been the driving force behind the paternity test demand all along. During family gatherings at Roberto's house, she'd been making increasingly bold comments about Sophia's appearance, questioning whether she really belonged in the family. She's been poisoning Blake's mind for months, Isabella told me during one of our conversations. At Roberto's birthday party back in July, Brittany kept pointing out how different Sophia looked from the other grandchildren. She even suggested that maybe you had an affair with someone Hispanic. The racism was subtle but unmistakable. Brittany, a woman whose own family tree was about as diverse as a country club membership list, couldn't accept that genetics sometimes skip generations. She saw Sophia's beautiful olive skin and dark curls as evidence of infidelity rather than heritage. But there was more to Brittany's campaign than just racism, there was greed. Isabella revealed that Blake and Brittany were in serious financial trouble. Brittany had quit her job at the dental office in Riverside 6 months earlier, claiming she wanted to be a full-time mom to Blake's children, despite the fact that she saw them maybe 6 days a month. Without Brittany's income, Blake was struggling to pay their mortgage on the house in Lake Elsinore. His child support payments to me, $1,200 a month for 3 children, were eating into their budget for Brittany's lifestyle desires. She keeps talking about wanting to take vacations to Hawaii and buy a new BMW, Isabella confided. But they can barely afford groceries. Brittany thinks if Blake doesn't have to pay child support for Sophia, they'll have an extra $400 a month. The math was simple and disgusting. Brittany was willing to traumatize an 8-year-old girl and destroy a family's peace for less than $400 a month. The situation escalated when Brittany started involving herself directly in Blake's Facebook drama. She began commenting on his posts, adding her own inflammatory remarks about gold-digging baby mamas, and the truth always comes out. She even shared a meme about paternity fraud that was clearly aimed at me. That's when I decided it was time to take action. I'd been documenting everything, but now I was ready to use that documentation. I contacted my lawyer, Patricia Hernandez, who'd handled my divorce, and scheduled a meeting to discuss my options. You have grounds for harassment, Patricia told me after reviewing the screenshots and text messages I'd collected. Blake's public accusations about fraud could be considered defamation. And if Brittany keeps involving herself in your custody arrangements, we might need to address that in court. But the most interesting development came from an unexpected source. Travis, my boyfriend and Blake's former friend, had insights into Blake's psychology that I'd never considered. Blake always needs someone else to blame when his life isn't going the way he wants, Travis explained during dinner at Romano's Macaroni Grill in Riverside. When we were friends, it was always his boss's fault, or his parents' fault, or society's fault. Now it's your fault and Sophia's fault. He can't accept that his problems are his own making. Travis's perspective helped me understand that Blake's paternity test demands weren't really about Sophia at all. They were about Blake's inability to take responsibility for his own life choices. 3 weeks after the paternity test results confirmed what I'd known all along, Blake made his biggest mistake yet. He decided to confront me in person. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was picking up the kids from Lincoln Elementary when Blake's beat-up Honda Civic pulled up behind my Toyota Camry. I could see Brittany in the passenger seat, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her arms crossed defensively. Blake got out of the car and approached me with the swagger of a man who thought he held all the cards. What he didn't know was that I'd been expecting this confrontation and had prepared for it. "Scarlett, we need to talk," he said, loud enough for other parents in the pickup line to hear. "This paternity test nonsense has gone on long enough." I stayed calm, speaking in an even tone. "The tests confirmed all 3 children are yours, Blake. There's nothing more to discuss." "Those tests were rigged," he shouted, causing several parents to turn and stare. "I know you paid someone off. Sophia doesn't look anything like me or the boys." That's when 8-year-old Sophia ran up to us, having spotted her father from across the playground. She threw her arms around Blake's legs with the pure joy that only a child can display. "Daddy, are you here to pick us up today?" The look on Blake's face was heartbreaking and telling. For just a moment, his anger melted away as he looked down at his daughter. Despite all his protests and denials, the love was still there. But then he caught Brittany watching from the car, and his expression hardened again. "No, princess. Daddy just needed to talk to Mommy about grown-up stuff." Sophia's face fell, and I felt my protective instincts kick into overdrive. I knelt down to her level and spoke gently. "Why don't you go wait by our car with Cameron and Connor? We'll go get ice cream after Daddy and I finish talking." Once Sophia was out of earshot, I stood up and faced Blake with steel in my voice. "2 paternity tests from 2 different companies confirmed she's your daughter. Roberto paid for them, you chose one of the companies, and you had access to both sets of results. What exactly are you claiming I manipulated?" Blake's conspiracy theory began unraveling in real time. He stammered about fake results and laboratory errors, but couldn't explain how I could have influenced tests that I hadn't paid for, hadn't chosen the company for, and hadn't been present during. "You want to know why Sophia looks different?" I continued, my voice rising slightly. "Because she looks like my grandmother Rosario, who was Cuban. You know, the grandmother whose photos you've seen hanging in my apartment for 3 years? The genetic diversity you're so suspicious of comes from my side of the family, not some imaginary affair." The crowd of parents was definitely watching now, and Blake realized he was losing control of the narrative. Brittany got out of the car and walked over, clearly intending to back up her husband. "Don't try to confuse the issue, Scarlett," Brittany said with fake sweetness. "Anyone with eyes can see that little girl doesn't belong in this family." That was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment Brittany said something so obviously racist and cruel that even Blake would have to recognize it. "That little girl is your stepdaughter," I said quietly. "And if you ever speak about my child like that again, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation." Roberto's silver Ford F-150 pulled into the school parking lot at that exact moment. He'd come to pick up the kids for their weekend visit, as planned. When he saw the confrontation happening, he parked quickly and walked over. "What's going on here?" Roberto asked, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd raised 5 children and didn't tolerate nonsense. Blake immediately started complaining about the test results, but Roberto cut him off. "Mijo, both tests confirmed all 3 children are yours. I paid for the tests, you chose one company, my lawyer chose the other. What exactly are you arguing about?" The fight went out of Blake all at once. Faced with his father's logic and the reality of the situation, he couldn't maintain his delusions any longer. But Brittany wasn't done. Those tests could still be wrong. Maybe we should get a 3rd one, just to be sure. Roberto looked at her with the kind of disdain usually reserved for people who kick puppies. "No," he said firmly. "There will be no more tests. Blake, You need to accept reality and be a father to your children. All three of them. 6 months have passed since that confrontation in the school parking lot, and life has settled into a new rhythm. Blake eventually stopped his Facebook rants about paternity fraud, partly because Roberto threatened to cut off the financial help he'd been providing for Blake's mortgage, and partly because even Blake's closest friends were getting tired of his conspiracy theories. The real turning point came when Blake's own mother, Elena, called him out publicly on one of his Facebook posts. Elena, who'd remained neutral during most of the drama, finally had enough when Blake posted a photo comparing Sophia to her siblings and asking people to see the obvious differences. Elena's comment was brief but devastating. "Blake, that little girl looks exactly like your great-grandmother Sophia, who the baby was named after. Stop embarrassing this family." Within hours, Blake had deleted not just that post, but all of his previous posts about the paternity situation. The public shaming from his own mother had accomplished what logic and science couldn't. But the story doesn't end there. 3 months ago, Blake and Brittany's financial situation finally collapsed completely. They lost the house in Lake Elsinore and moved into a cramped apartment in Hemet. Brittany, faced with the reality of their situation, went back to work at a different dental office, and Blake picked up a second job doing landscaping with Roberto's company on weekends. The irony is thick. Blake is now working for his father to make ends meet, partly because he wasted months trying to avoid paying child support for his own daughter. As for Sophia, she remains blissfully unaware of most of the drama that swirled around her parentage. She knows Daddy and his wife had some grown-up problems for a while, but she's too young to understand the details. What she does know is that Grandpa Roberto loves her brothers adore her, and Mommy will always protect her. Travis and I are still together, and he's been incredible throughout this entire ordeal. Unlike Blake, Travis sees Sophia's unique beauty as something to celebrate, not question. He's helped me teach all 3 children to be proud of their diverse heritage and to stand up against people who try to make them feel different or less than. The relationship between Blake and the children has improved somewhat, though it's still strained. He sees them every other weekend now, and while Brittany has stopped her overt hostility towards Sophia, the damage to their relationship may be permanent. Sophia is polite to Brittany but maintains her distance, a wise decision for an 8-year-old. Last month, I received an unexpected apology text from Blake. "I know I handled things badly with the paternity test situation. I was stressed about money and let other people influence my thinking. I'm sorry for what I put you and the kids through." It wasn't much, but it was acknowledgement. I replied simply, "Thank you for saying that. The kids love you and want you to be their dad. That's all that matters now." Roberto continues to be an amazing grandfather, and he's never once mentioned the money he spent on those paternity tests. At Sophia's 9th birthday party last month, he pulled me aside and said something I'll never forget. "That little girl has brought so much joy to this family. Anyone who can't see that is missing out on something beautiful." He was right. Sophia, with her curly dark hair and bright green eyes, her infectious laugh and fierce spirit, is a gift to everyone who takes the time to really see her. Blake almost missed out on that gift because he listened to fear and prejudice instead of love. The legal threats Blake made never materialized, of course. You can't sue someone for fraud when genetic testing proves you're wrong. My lawyer Patricia keeps all the documentation on file, just in case, but we both know Blake learned his lesson. As I tuck my 3 children into bed each night in our cozy apartment in Corona, I'm grateful for how this story ended. The truth really did set us free from Blake's accusations, free from Brittany's manipulation, and free from the cloud of suspicion that had been hanging over our family. My ex-husband demanded a paternity test to stop paying child support, thinking he'd found his escape from responsibility. Instead, he discovered that his beautiful daughter really was his all along, and in the process, he learned that some truths are worth more than money. Sophia is sleeping peacefully in her room right now, surrounded by photos of her family, including one of her great-great-grandmother Sophia, the Cuban woman she resembles so strongly. She has no idea she looks different from her siblings because, in our house, different is beautiful. And that's the truth Blake wasn't ready for, but the truth our family will carry forward with pride.